I've never seen a room of 200 people go completely silent that fast. My hands were still in the air, my voice still echoing off the walls of that overpriced restaurant, and the waiter's words hung in the space between us like a death sentence. "Ma'am, that old homeless woman you just had security escort out, she was your son's mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell. She paid $18,750 for your entire family reunion dinner in advance." The receipt fluttered from his fingers onto our table, not some scrap of paper, but a proper invoice with her name, her American Express black card number, partially visible, and that devastating amount, the lavender scent she'd left behind, suddenly seemed to fill my nostrils, choking me with shame. What have I done? It was supposed to be the perfect family reunion, my first time hosting since Richard passed, my chance to show everyone that I was doing just fine on my own. I'd spent 43 days planning it down to the centerpieces and place cards. I still have the notebook with all my little check marks and confirmations. I was wearing my navy St. John knit dress with the gold buttons that cost more than my first car, pearls Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary, and the perfect shade of lipstick, confident, coral. My son James had flown in from Seattle with his wife Melissa and their 2 boys. My daughter Catherine came up from Atlanta with her husband. Even my sister flew in from Phoenix. 19 family members in total, gathered at Bellevue, that 5-star restaurant downtown with the chandeliers that looked like floating diamonds and the kind of service that makes you feel like royalty. I'll tell you exactly how much the prix menu cost per person, but let's save that humiliating detail for when I explain how thoroughly I destroyed my family's opinion of me in less than 15 minutes. I come from a generation of women who were taught that appearance is everything. My mother used to say, "Margaret, the world treats you according to how you present yourself." She'd inspect my outfit each morning before school, tugging at loose threads, adjusting collars. "There's no excuse for sloppiness," she'd say, her own lipstick always perfect, not a hair out of place even when she was dying of cancer. I remember sitting by her hospital bed, watching her apply blush to her hollow cheeks. "They may take my health," she whispered, "but they won't take my dignity." I've carried those words with me for 40 years. Maybe that explains something about what happened, but it doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses what I did that night, how quickly I judged someone based on nothing but my own shallow perceptions. Richard and I had been married for 37 years when he died. Heart attack, right in the middle of a golf game. One minute he was lining up a putt, the next he was gone. His friends said he didn't suffer, as if that was supposed to comfort me. What about my suffering? 3 years I'd been a widow, living in that two-big house in the suburbs, rattling around with just the cleaning lady coming twice a week. The loneliness is like a physical weight sometimes, pressing down until it's hard to breathe. Do you know what it's like to set the dinner table for one, night after night, to realize you haven't spoken aloud to another human being in 3 days? I'd been filling that emptiness with things, redecorating the living room, buying designer clothes I rarely wore, joining committees at the country club. When my son James suggested a family reunion, I jumped at the chance to be needed again, to be the matriarch at the center of it all. James married Melissa 8 years ago. She's a pediatric surgeon, brilliant and beautiful, with that kind of effortless class some women just have. I'll admit I was jealous at first. She was everything I'd wanted to be at her age, but she won me over with her kindness, the way she genuinely seemed to care about my stories, my opinions. They have 2 boys, Connor, who's 7, and Ethan, 5. Perfect little gentlemen when they want to be, but with that wild energy that makes me tired just watching them. James is my oldest, always the responsible one. He's a software engineer for one of those big tech companies, makes more money than Richard and I ever did combined. Catherine, my baby, is more free-spirited. She married David, who teaches high school history and coaches basketball. They don't have children yet, but they're trying. I know because Catherine calls me after every disappointing pregnancy test, and I try to say the right things, to be supportive without being pushy. I wasn't always good at that balance. I'll tell you about the worst fight we ever had later, because it matters to this story in ways I couldn't have imagined. The reservation was for 7 p.m. on a Saturday, June 18th. I arrived at 6:30, wanting to make sure everything was perfect. The table was set beautifully in the private dining room I'd requested, white roses and baby's breath in crystal vases, the good china, real silver. The Mata D, Marcus was his name, greeted me like I was visiting royalty. Mrs. Henderson, everything has been arranged according to your specifications. He pulled out my chair at the head of the table, unfolded a napkin across my lap. Your guests will be seated as they arrive. Would you care for a drink while you wait? I ordered a gin and tonic, feeling the pleasant buzz of anticipation. Everything was going according to plan. Families started arriving in little clusters, my sister Janet and her husband Phil, then Catherine and David, then James's family. The children were scrubbed clean and wearing button-down shirts, their hair slicked down with water. Melissa looked radiant in a simple black dress, her dark hair twisted up in some complicated knot. She hugged me, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, something expensive in French. The place looks amazing, Margaret, she said, using my first name the way she always does. Even though I've told her many times she can call me Mom, you've outdone yourself. I preened under the compliment, offering drinks to everyone, playing the perfect hostess. I didn't notice her glancing at her watch, checking her phone. I didn't know then that she was waiting for someone. We were halfway through our appetizers, seared scallops with some kind of foam, the kind of pretentious food that costs a fortune, when I first noticed the old woman standing in the doorway of our private dining room. She looked so out of place, it was jarring, like finding a weed in a carefully tended garden. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall, with a slight stoop to her shoulders. Her clothes were clean but definitely not designer, a simple navy blue dress that hung loose on her thin frame, sensible shoes, a worn leather purse clutched in gnarled hands. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but there was nothing stylish about her. I remember thinking she must have wandered in from the street, or maybe she was someone's home health aide. I caught Marcus's eye, raising my eyebrows in a silent question. He nodded slightly, approaching the woman. I turned back to my conversation, assuming he would take care of the situation. I'll never forget what happened next. Nana Connor's voice cut through the dinner chatter as he spotted the old woman. He jumped up from his seat, napkin falling to the floor, and raced across the room. Ethan was right behind him. They threw themselves at the old woman, who braced herself against the doorframe, laughing as she tried to hug them both at once. Boys, careful now, James called, but he was smiling. Melissa was already up, moving toward them. Eleanor, you made it, she said, embracing the woman warmly. I sat frozen, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, as I watched my daughter-in-law introduce this shabby old woman to my sister, to Catherine, to everyone at my carefully curated family reunion. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a tightening in my chest. Who was this person crashing my perfect evening? James appeared at my elbow, his hand on my shoulder. Mom, this is Melissa's grandmother, Eleanor. She's visiting from Tucson. We weren't sure she'd make it tonight. Her flight was delayed. He smiled down at me expectantly. I managed to stand, to extend my hand, but my smile felt tight, my words stiff as I said, "How nice to meet you." Eleanor's handshake was firm despite her age, her blue eyes sharp and assessing as they met mine. Margaret, I've heard so much about you. Something in her tone made me wonder exactly what she'd heard. I gestured vaguely toward the table. Please, join us. But there was no empty seat. I hadn't been told to expect another guest. The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as the staff brought another chair, squeezed it in between Melissa and Ethan, set another place. I watched, seething quietly, as my perfect symmetrical table arrangement was disrupted. Eleanor settled in, immediately engaged with the children, asking them questions about school, listening intently to their rambling answers. She had a way with them, that easy confidence some older people have with children. I caught myself thinking that Richard would have liked her, and the thought just made me angrier. This was my evening, my event. I'd spent weeks planning it, thousands of dollars arranging it, and no one, not James, not Melissa, had bothered to tell me there would be an extra guest. As the main course was served, perfectly cooked prime rib for most of us, though Eleanor requested the salmon, I tried to recover my hostess composure. I made small talk with Janet across the table, commented on the wine, all while keeping one eye on the interloper. She ate slowly, methodically, nothing in her manner suggesting she felt out of place in this exclusive restaurant. The boys clearly adored her, with Ethan slipping her his dinner roll when he thought no one was looking. I watched as she tucked it into her purse rather than eating it. That's when I first began to wonder if she was one of those elderly people who lived on a fixed income, who saved food from restaurants because they couldn't afford groceries. When dessert came, a deconstructed cheesecake that looked more like art than food, I excused myself to the ladies' room. I needed a moment alone, a chance to regain my composure. In the elegant marble bathroom, I stared at my reflection, touching up my lipstick with hands that weren't quite steady. I'd spent $280 on this face foundation, concealer, blush, eyeshadow, all from that fancy counter at Nordstrom where the salesperson had assured me I looked 10 years younger, but all I could see were the lines around my eyes, the slight sag beneath my chin that no amount of expensive cream seemed to fix. I looked like exactly what I was, a widow pushing 60, trying desperately to maintain control over a life that kept changing. Without my permission. When I returned to the table, Eleanor was gone, and Melissa was looking worried, checking her phone again. She said she needed some air, James explained as I sat down. Mom, you didn't tell her she needed to leave, did you? The accusation in his voice stung. Of course not, I said, offended he would even suggest it. I was in the bathroom, but honestly, James, you might have warned me you were bringing an extra guest. It's simple courtesy. James and Melissa exchanged a look that married people telepathy that excludes everyone else. We did tell you, Melissa said quietly. I mentioned it on the phone last week that my grandmother was visiting and would join us. Had she? I couldn't remember. Or had I been so caught up in my plans that I simply hadn't listened? 20 minutes passed, and Eleanor didn't return. The children were getting restless, the conversation around the table subdued. I could feel my perfect evening slipping away. Finally, Melissa stood up. I'm going to look for her. She doesn't know the area, and she sometimes gets confused in new places. The worry in her voice seemed excessive for a grown woman who'd just stepped out for some air. I'm sure she's fine, I said, trying to salvage the mood. Let's order coffee. I've arranged for a special dessert wine that pairs perfectly with, but Melissa was already walking away. James right behind her. They returned 10 minutes later, both looking distressed. We can't find her, James said. We've checked outside the main dining room, even asked at the front desk. I sighed, making no effort to hide my annoyance. She's probably in the bathroom, or stepped outside to make a phone call. I'm sure she'll be back. But as another 15 minutes ticked by with no sign of Eleanor, even I began to worry. This wasn't just about my ruined evening anymore. An elderly woman had disappeared from my family gathering. I was about to suggest calling security when a waiter approached our table. Excuse me, he said, addressing James rather than me, which I found irritating. There's an older lady sitting alone in the main dining room. She seems upset. She mentioned she was with a family party. James and Melissa jumped up immediately. That must be her, Melissa said, relief flooding her voice. They hurried out, leaving me sitting there, acutely aware of the eyes of my remaining family members. The judgment in their expressions was unmistakable. Somehow, this had become my fault. When James returned a few minutes later, his face was tight with anger. Mom, what did you say to Eleanor when I was helping Connor in the bathroom? I blinked, genuinely confused. Nothing. I don't think we spoke. He shook his head, not believing me. She says you told her this was a private family function, and asked her how she'd managed to get in without a reservation. She says you suggested she might be more comfortable at the diner down the street. The blood drained from my face. That conversation had happened, but not with Eleanor. While James was gone, I'd spotted an elderly woman I thought was a stranger, wandering near our table, peering at our food. In my defensive hostess mode, I'd politely but firmly redirected her. Had that been Eleanor? Had I actually shooed away my daughter-in-law's grandmother without realizing it? I'll tell you the exact words I said to that woman, and I still cringe remembering them. I'd approached her with my practiced country club smile, and said, "Excuse me, this is a private family function. The main dining room is through those doors." When she didn't move immediately, just stood there looking at me with those piercing blue eyes, I'd added, "I believe there's a lovely diner just down the block that might be more suitable. This restaurant has a certain standard. You understand." I'd been so certain she was some confused old woman who had wandered in off the street, attracted by the fancy food and celebration. I never imagined she was connected to my family. The shame of it burns even now, as I tell you this. "That wasn't Eleanor," I said weakly, knowing how pathetic it sounded. "It was some other woman. A stranger. James's expression hardened. Mom, it was Eleanor. She's wearing a navy dress. She has white hair in a bun. She's wearing her dead husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. She even showed it to you when she was telling you about how they met. I had no memory of that conversation. All I remembered was an old woman who didn't belong, who threatened the perfect image of the family gathering I'd worked so hard to create. Catherine joined us, her eyes accusing. James, Melissa's with her now, but Eleanor wants to leave. She's really upset. She turned to me. Mom, how could you? She's 84 years old. She flew across the country to meet you. The disappointment in my daughter's voice cut deeper than any anger could have. I felt sick, a cold sweat breaking out across my back. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought she was someone else. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I had judged Eleanor the moment I saw her. Her simple clothes, her lack of designer accessories, her age. I had decided she didn't belong in my carefully curated evening. What happened next still makes me flinch when I think about it. I tried to fix things. I followed James and Catherine back to the main dining room, where Eleanor sat with Melissa, a cup of tea untouched before her. Eleanor, I began, forcing brightness into my voice, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please come back and join us. We're just about to have coffee and dessert wine. Eleanor looked up at me, and there was something in her eyes, not anger, which I could have fought against, but a deep, resigned hurt that left me defenseless. No thank you, Margaret. I think it's best if I go now. I've called a car. Her voice was soft but firm, dignified in a way that made my expensive clothes and perfect makeup feel like a child's dress-up game. Please, I said, aware that people at nearby tables were watching this uncomfortable scene unfold. You're part of the family. Of course you're welcome. But Eleanor just shook her head. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. She quoted Maya Angelou so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Then she stood, patted Melissa's hand. Darling, stay with your family. I'll see you tomorrow. Before anyone could protest, she was walking away, straight-backed despite her age, that same lavender scent trailing behind her. I should have let her go with dignity. I should have respected her wishes and dealt with the fallout later, privately. But panic seized me, panic at what my family would think, at how this would look, at the perfect evening in ruins. Eleanor, wait, I called, hurrying after her, aware of heads turning throughout the restaurant. I caught up with her near the front entrance, grabbing her arm perhaps more roughly than I intended. Please, I said, loud enough that the host and two waiters looked over. This is ridiculous. It was a simple misunderstanding. You can't just leave. What Eleanor said next, I'll never forget. She looked me straight in the eyes, her voice steady. Margaret, I survived the loss of my husband after 52 years of marriage. I raised 4 children, put them all through college working as a nurse. I beat breast cancer twice. I have lived through things that would break you in half. I don't need to sit through a dinner with someone who took one look at my Macy's dress and decided I wasn't good enough for her table. She gently removed my hand from her arm. Your son and his family are precious to me. For their sake, I will be civil when we meet again. But tonight, I am choosing my own peace. And with that, she walked out the door, leaving me standing there, mouth open, as everyone in the vicinity stared. I returned to our private dining room in a daze, aware of whispers following me. My family sat in uncomfortable silence, no one touching the dessert wine I'd so carefully selected. She left, I announced unnecessarily. James wouldn't look at me. Melissa had tears in her eyes. The boys seemed confused, sensing the tension but not understanding it. Catherine shook her head slightly, that same gesture she'd been making since she was a teenager whenever I disappointed her. Janet, my own sister, was studying her napkin, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. I didn't know she was with us, I tried to explain. I thought she was just some random old woman wandering around the restaurant. Even as the words left my mouth, I heard how terrible they sounded. Some random old woman, as if being elderly and unknown to me made her less worthy of basic respect. Melissa stood abruptly. We should go. Boys, get your jackets. The finality in her voice sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a ruined dinner. This was a fracture in my relationship with my son's family. Wait, I said desperately. Let me at least pay for dinner. We've barely touched the dessert. James finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. It's already taken care of, Mom. I frowned, confused. That's not possible. I gave them my credit card. I specifically told the restaurant I was hosting. James shook his head. Eleanor arranged it all. She contacted the restaurant last week. She wanted to thank us for including her in the family reunion. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor, the woman I had dismissed as not belonging, had paid for my elaborate dinner party. There must be some mistake, I insisted, signaling frantically for the waiter. This was my event, my treat for the family. The idea that this woman I'd judged so harshly had stepped in and taken over was unbearable. The waiter, Ryan, according to his namatag, approached cautiously, clearly having witnessed the earlier scene. Yes, ma'am. I tried to keep my voice even, dignified. There seems to be some confusion about the bill. I arranged to pay for this dinner. My credit card should be on file. Ryan's expression was a mixture of discomfort and something else. Pity, perhaps. Actually, ma'am, the bill has been prepaid in full. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell arranged it last Tuesday. She also left a 25% gratuity. My face burned. That's impossible. This dinner was my idea, my event. She couldn't have known about it. But even as I protested, I remembered James mentioning that Melissa had told me about Eleanor coming. Had she also mentioned Eleanor wanting to contribute? Had I simply not listened, too caught up in my own vision of the perfect gathering? Let me see the receipt, I demanded, aware that I was making a scene but unable to stop myself. Ryan hesitated, then disappeared briefly, returning with a crisp piece of paper. She actually authorized me to share this with you, if there was any confusion. He placed the receipt before me, and there it was, in black and white. $18,750 for dinner for 20 people. She'd even accounted for herself. Paid on Eleanor Blackwell's American Express Black Card, with an additional $4,687.50 tip. The date on the receipt was June 10th, a full week before the dinner. I stared at the amount, at the signature at the bottom, feeling as if the floor was tilting beneath me. Mom, James said quietly, Eleanor is a retired pediatric surgeon. She was one of the first women in her field. The hospital wing where Melissa works is named after her. The information crashed over me in waves. Pediatric surgeon, hospital wing, American Express, Black Card. And I had suggested she might be more comfortable at a diner. I had assessed her worn leather purse, her simple dress, her age, and I had found her wanting. I had never bothered to ask who she was, to see beyond the surface. That's when I lost it, truly lost it, in the middle of that 5-star restaurant I didn't know. I cried, my voice too loud, too shrill. No one told me she was important. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were unforgivable. Important, as if human dignity were reserved only for those with status, wealth, accomplishments. As if my courtesy should be contingent on someone's bank account or professional achievements. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine was the first to stand. I think we're done here, she said quietly. One by one, my family members rose, gathered their things, and left. 19 people walked out, leaving me alone at that beautiful table with its wilting floral arrangements and half-empty wine glasses. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at Eleanor's receipt. The waiter eventually approached, his discomfort evident. Ma'am, would you like me to call you a car? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As he turned to go, I grabbed his arm. Wait, the old woman, Eleanor. She took something from the table, a dinner roll. I saw her put it in her purse. I don't know why it seemed important in that moment to justify my assumptions, to find some evidence that I hadn't been completely wrong about her. The waiter's expression shifted from discomfort to something harder. Mrs. Blackwell always takes a roll for the birds. She feeds them in the park across from her hotel every morning. She's been coming here for years. She says our sourdough is their favorite. Another assumption shattered. Another judgment revealed as hollow. She's a lovely woman, he continued. Always remembers all our names, asks about our families. He paused, then added, she requested me specifically for your party because I mentioned last month that my daughter was starting college in the fall. She left me a separate tip, enough to cover my daughter's textbooks for her first year. With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with my shame. The car arrived, a sleek black town car with a driver in a suit. I moved through the restaurant like a ghost, aware of the stares, the whispers, Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. The driver held the door for me, his face professionally blank. "Where to, ma'am?" For a moment, I couldn't remember my own address. My mind was filled with the image of Eleanor walking away, straight-backed and dignified, refusing to be diminished by my cruelty. "The Ritz-Carlton," I said finally. I couldn't face it. My empty house, not tonight. In the quiet of the car, I took out my phone, scrolling through recent text messages. There it was, from Melissa, dated June 11th. "By the way, my grandmother Eleanor is so excited to meet everyone at the reunion dinner. She's insisting on treating us all. I told her that's your thing, but she's pretty determined. Hope that's okay." I had responded with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up emoji. I hadn't even read the message properly. I scrolled further and found another. Text from James, sent just yesterday. "Mom, don't forget Melissa's grandmother is joining us tomorrow. She's really looking forward to meeting you." I had replied, "Everything's under control. Table 419. He had corrected me, 20 with Eleanor, and I had written back, "Of course, typo." But it wasn't a typo. I simply hadn't registered Eleanor as a real person, as someone who mattered. I had been so focused on creating the perfect image, the perfect table setting, the perfect menu, the perfect family gathering that I had missed the actual human beings involved. Is that what I had become after Richard died? Someone so desperate to control the surface of things that I'd lost sight of what truly mattered? The thought terrified me more than I can express. In my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my expensive dress, and did something I hadn't done since Richard's funeral. I cried without restraint, ugly sobs that left my carefully applied makeup in ruins. Cried for the hurt I'd caused Eleanor, for the disappointment in my children's eyes, for the woman I'd apparently become. When the storm finally passed, I washed my face, staring at the stranger in the mirror. Without the makeup, without the careful facade, I looked old and tired and afraid. "What would Richard say if he could see you now?" I whispered to my reflection. I knew the answer. He would be ashamed. I picked up my phone, composed a text to James. "I am so sorry. What I did was unforgivable. Please tell Melissa and Eleanor how deeply I regret my behavior." I stared at the words, knowing how inadequate they were, how they couldn't possibly repair the damage I'd done, but they were all I had. I pressed send, then turned off my phone, unable to bear the thought of seeing message delivered with no response. That night, I barely slept, replaying the evening over and over in my mind. Eleanor's dignified exit, my family's silent judgment, the waiter's revelation about the birds. I kept thinking about what Eleanor had said. "I have lived through things that would break you in half." She was right. My entire identity had been constructed around being Richard's wife, the perfect hostess, the woman with the immaculate house and designer clothes. When he died, I'd clung even harder to those external markers of worth, but they were hollow, meaningless. They hadn't saved me from making a terrible mistake, from revealing the worst version of myself to the people I loved. Most morning came, gray light filtering through the hotel curtains. I ordered coffee from room service, unable to face the breakfast room where I might see other people, where I might have to engage in pleasantries while carrying this weight of shame. The young man who brought the coffee had a kind smile, reminding me of David, Catherine's husband. "Beautiful day, ma'am," he said, setting down the tray. I nodded, not trusting my voice. After he left, I found myself wondering about his life. His story. Was this job putting him through college? Did he have family waiting at home? A week ago, I wouldn't have thought to ask. Wouldn't have seen him as anything more than a function, a service provider. The revelation of how narrowly I'd been seeing the world was both painful and strangely liberating. I turned on my phone, bracing myself. There were 3 text messages. The first was from Janet, "Call me when you're ready to talk." The second was from Catherine, "What you did was wrong. But I know you're better than that. I love you, Mom." The third was from James, and it made my heart stop. "Eleanor wants to meet for coffee. 10 a.m. at the Bluebird Cafe on 7th. Come alone." It was 8:37. I had less than an hour and a half to prepare for what would surely be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I dressed simply, jeans, a sweater, minimal makeup. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to impress anyone or maintain some carefully crafted image. I just wanted to be authentic, to face Eleanor as my true self, whatever that meant now. The Bluebird Cafe was nothing like Bellevue, a small, homey place with mismatched chairs and the rich scent of coffee and baked goods. I spotted Eleanor immediately, sitting by the window, a paperback book open before her. She wore a different dress today, green with small yellow flowers, but the same sensible shoes. As I approached, I noticed the delicate chain around her neck, the gold wedding band that hung from it. Mrs. Blackwell, I said softly. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. She looked up, closing her book. I noticed it was a mystery novel, the kind Richard used to read. Margaret, please sit. Her voice was neither warm nor cold, just measured. I sat across from her, hands clasped tightly in my lap. A waitress approached, young, with a nose ring and brightly colored hair. The usual, Eleanor, she asked, and Eleanor nodded. And for your friend? The word felt like a gift I didn't deserve. Just coffee, please, I said. Black. When the waitress left, silence fell between us. Eleanor watched me calmly, making no effort to ease my discomfort. Finally, I spoke. I am deeply, profoundly sorry for how I treated you last night. There is no excuse for my behavior. The words felt insufficient, inadequate, but they were all I had. Eleanor nodded slightly, acknowledging my apology without accepting it. Why did you do it? She asked simply. No accusations, no anger, just a straightforward question that cut to the heart of things. I could have offered excuses that I didn't know who she was, that there had been a misunderstanding, but Eleanor deserved better than that. She deserved the truth. I judged you, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I saw your clothes, your age, and I decided you didn't belong in that restaurant, at my family gathering. I was so focused on creating this perfect image that I couldn't see past appearances. I took a shaky breath. It's not who I want to be, but it's who I was last night. And I am deeply ashamed. The waitress returned with our drinks, a simple black coffee for me, and for Eleanor, a concoction with whipped cream and caramel that looked decadent and delightful. As she set them down, she said, Your scone will be out in a minute, Eleanor. Just pulled fresh from the oven. Eleanor thanked her by name, Zoe, and asked about her classes. They chatted briefly about a psychology exam Zoe was preparing for, and I watched in silence, seeing how easily Eleanor connected with this young woman, how genuinely interested she was in her life. It was a stark contrast to my own behavior at Bellevue, where I'd barely acknowledged the staff except to make demands. When Zoe left, Eleanor turned back to me. Margaret, I'm 84 years old. At my age, you learn that life is too short for grudges. I agreed to meet you today because Melissa loves James, and James loves you. We're connected now, whether we like it or not. She took a sip of her elaborate coffee drink, then continued, I don't need your apology, though I accept it. What I would like is your understanding. My understanding, I echoed, confused. Eleanor nodded. Understanding that worth isn't measured in designer labels or bank accounts. Understanding that every person you meet has a story you can't see from the outside. She fingered the wedding band on her necklace. My Henry was a high school science teacher. We never had much money, but we had enough. He died 23 years ago, and not a day passes that I don't miss him. When Melissa married James, Henry should have been there to see his great-granddaughter walk down the aisle. When the boys were born, he should have been there to hold them. Her voice remained steady, but I could see the grief in her eyes, a grief I recognized, that I shared. After Henry died, she continued, I went back to work. I was 61, and everyone expected me to retire, to fade quietly into widowhood. But I worked another 15 years. Not because we needed the money. Henry had good insurance, but because helping children gave my life meaning. The hospital wing wasn't named after me because I donated millions. It was named after me because I saved lives, because I trained a generation of surgeons who are saving lives still. She paused, studying me. What gives your life meaning, Margaret? Now that Richard is gone, the question struck me like a physical blow. What did give my life meaning? Planning dinner parties, redecorating rooms no one used, shopping for clothes to impress people I didn't particularly like. I had no ready answer, and the realization was devastating. I don't know, I whispered. I've been so lost since Richard died. I keep trying to hold on to the life we had, but it's slipping away, and I don't know who I am without him. Eleanor nodded, a flicker of compassion crossing her face. Grief isn't just about losing the person you love. It's about losing the person you were when you were with them. The self that existed in that relationship is gone. And you have to find a new way to be in the world. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine briefly. That's the work of widowhood, Margaret. Not preserving some perfect image of the past, but building something new from the ruins. Zoe appeared with Eleanor's scone, still warm, golden brown, with a pat of butter melting on the side. Eleanor broke it in half, offering a piece to me. I hesitated, then accepted it. We ate in silence for a moment, the simple pleasure of good food providing a brief respite from the intensity of our conversation. "It's delicious," I said, and Eleanor smiled, the first real smile she'd directed at me. "Best scones in the city. Henry and I used to come here every Sunday after church. The owner's son runs it now, but the recipe hasn't changed." I looked around the cafe with new eyes, noticing the faded photographs on the walls, the worn but clean tables, the mix of customers, students with laptops, elderly couples sharing pastries, a mother trying to wrangle two small children. It wasn't fancy or impressive, but there was a warmth to it, an authenticity that Bellevue, with all its crystal and silver, couldn't match. "I'd like to bring the boys here sometime," I said, surprising myself with the thought. "They'd probably enjoy a hot chocolate and a scone more than that deconstructed cheesecake last night." Eleanor chuckled. Connor told me it looked like someone had already eaten it and put it back on the plate. The shared laughter felt like a small miracle, a tiny bridge across the chasm I'd created. "Margaret," Eleanor said, serious again, "I accept your apology. But it's not me you need to make things right with, it's your family, especially James and Melissa. They were mortified last night." I nodded, the shame washing over me again. "I don't know how to fix it." I said the unforgivable. Eleanor considered. "This, perhaps, but family has a capacity for forgiveness that often surprises us. The question is, are you willing to change? Not just apologize, but actually see people differently." I thought about the waiter at Bellevue, about Zoe with her bright hair and psychology exam, about Eleanor herself, all people I would have dismissed or overlooked just a day ago. "I want to," I said honestly. "I don't want to be the person I was last night. I don't know exactly how to change, but I want to try." Eleanor seemed satisfied with this answer. "Then start by listening, really listening to your children. Ask them about their lives, their hopes, their struggles. Not to fix things or offer unsolicited advice, but just to understand." She finished her coffee, setting the cup down with a decisive clink. "And perhaps it's time to find something that gives your life purpose beyond social status and appearances. Volunteer, take a class, make new friends who didn't know you as Richard's wife. Build a life that's yours alone." The wisdom in her words resonated deeply. For 3 years, I'd been trying to preserve a life that no longer existed, to maintain an identity that had died with Richard. It hadn't made me happy, it had made me shallow, judgmental, lonely. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more deeply than I could express. "Not just for this conversation, but for your grace last night. You had every right to be furious, to expose me in front of everyone. Instead, you walked away." With dignity, Eleanor's expression softened. "You know, Margaret, when I first heard James was marrying into a family with a mother who wore St. John knits and pearls and hosted elaborate dinner parties, I was concerned. I come from simpler stock. My parents were immigrants who ran a grocery store. I worried there might be a clash of values." She smiled slightly. "I didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically on our first meeting, but here we are." She reached into her purse, that same worn leather bag I had so quickly judged, and pulled out a small envelope. "I brought something for you." Inside the envelope was a photograph, yellowed with age. A young couple stood in front of a modest house, the woman in a simple white dress, the man in a suit that looked slightly too big. They were laughing, caught in a moment of pure joy. "That's Henry and me on our wedding day," Eleanor said. "We were 22. The dress cost $18.75. I still remember, because it was a splurge for us." Then, the reception was in my parents' backyard. Folding chairs, punch bowl, my mother's lasagna. Not fancy by anyone's standards, but still the happiest day of my life. I studied the photo, seeing in the young Eleanor's face the same strength and dignity I'd witnessed last night. "You were beautiful," I said, and I meant it, not because of her dress or her looks, but because of the joy radiating from her expression, the evident love between her and Henry. "Still am," Eleanor replied with a wink, and I laughed. Genuinely laughed for what felt like the first time in years. Yes, I agreed. You absolutely are. As we prepared to leave, I reached for the check, but Eleanor waved me off. I've got a tab here, she said. Been coming so long they practically consider me part of the furniture. She insisted on paying, and this time I didn't protest. It wasn't about the money, it was about accepting her generosity with grace, about recognizing that allowing someone else to give is sometimes the greater kindness. Outside on the sidewalk, the morning sun warm on our faces, I asked, would you come to dinner again? Not at Bellevue, obviously. Maybe at my home. Something simple. I make a decent pot roast. Eleanor considered the invitation. On one condition, she said finally. No St. John knits, no pearls, just Margaret, whoever she is without the armor. It was a challenge, but also a gift. Permission to be authentic, to shed the trappings I'd been hiding behind. Deal, I said, extending my hand. She shook it firmly, then surprised me by pulling me into a brief hug. That lavender scent enveloped me again, but this time it felt comforting rather than accusing. See you Sunday at 6, she said. I'll bring dessert. I watched her walk away, straight-backed and steady despite her years. Then I took out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I deleted the interior decorating apps, the shopping apps, the social networking apps that had been consuming my time and attention without filling the emptiness inside me. Instead, I downloaded a volunteer match app, scrolling through opportunities in my area. A literacy program at the local elementary school caught my eye, reading with children twice a week. I signed up for an orientation session, feeling a flutter of anxiety but also a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That Sunday, Eleanor came to dinner, bringing with her an apple pie she'd baked herself and a bottle of inexpensive but delicious red wine. James and Melissa came too, with the boys. The conversation was awkward at first, the memory of that disastrous night at Bellevue still fresh. But slowly, as we ate pot roast off my everyday dishes in my casual dining room, no fancy centerpieces, no elaborate place settings, something began to shift. Connor asked Eleanor to tell the story of how she performed surgery on a famous baseball player's son, and we all listened, captivated by her description of saving a child's life. Ethan spilled his milk, and instead of fussing about the tablecloth, I laughed and helped him clean it up. By the time we finished Eleanor's pie, served with grocery store ice cream, the tension had largely dissipated. That was 6 months ago. Yesterday, Eleanor and I took the boys to the park to feed the birds with sourdough rolls from the Bluebird Cafe. We've fallen into a routine of sorts. Sunday dinners at my house, midweek lunches at the cafe, occasional museum visits with the boys. I've started volunteering at the school, reading with first graders who are struggling with literacy. It's not always easy, and I still catch myself slipping into old patterns of judgment and superficiality. But when that happens, I think of Eleanor in her simple dress with her worn purse, Eleanor with her extraordinary life of service and resilience, Eleanor feeding birds in the park because it gives her joy. Last week, I sold Richard's golf clubs and used the money to donate books to the school where I volunteer. I keep his picture by my bed, but I've redecorated my bedroom in colors I love rather than the neutral palette he preferred. Small steps toward a new life, a new identity. Eleanor says grief is a journey, not a destination. You don't get over it, she told me recently. You learn to carry it differently, to build a life around the empty space. She's right, as she so often is. The emptiness where Richard used to be will always be there, but it's no longer the defining feature of my existence. If you're listening to this and you've judged someone based on appearances, if you've mistaken expensive things for value or status for worth, I hope my story makes you pause and reconsider. We're all more than what we wear, more than what we own, more than what we present to the world. Eleanor taught me that the true measure of a person isn't in their clothes or their car or their address. It's in how they treat others, especially those who can do nothing for them. It's in the dignity they maintain when faced with cruelty. It's in the compassion they show to those who may not deserve it. And if you're grieving, if you're lost in the wilderness of life after loss, know that there is a path forward. Not back to what was, that's gone forever, but to something new that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. I still miss Richard every day. I still talk to his picture sometimes, especially when I've had a glass of wine, but I'm no longer just Richard's widow, the woman with the St. John knits, and the perfect dinner parties. I'm Margaret, age 59, volunteer reading tutor, friend of Eleanor, grandmother to Connor and Ethan, still figuring things out but doing it with more authenticity and less armor than before. Before I go, I want to ask, what masks are you wearing? What armor are you hiding behind? Who might you be if you let all that go? Leave a comment below, subscribe if this story touched you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become more fully yourself. I'm recording this from my back porch, where the birds are singing and the coffee is hot and life, despite everything, is good. Thank you for listening to my story.